today I want to talk about when God rests. I want to talk about the question, does God need rest? Of course, we all know the famous story in Genesis, that on the seventh day, God rests. And I think to myself, of course God rests. He just created a universe. He's exhausted. John Lubbock from The Use of Life says, "Rest is not idleness, and to lie sometimes on the grass under trees on a summer's day, listening to the murmur of water, or watching the clouds float across the sky, is by no means a waste of time." And I'm comforted by the idea that after 6 days of working to create the universe, God enjoyed himself, and he took the time to lie on the bank of a river, and he rested, and he enjoyed what he created. I think that's a beautiful thought. And I think it's one that we should incorporate into our lives. What does rest look like for us? God took the time to enjoy and embrace the beauty that he'd created. Why don't we do that in this modern world? Why are we always hell-bent on going from one project to the other and achieving? Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I'm God." And what that implies is that in the stillness, we can know God more deeply. We can experience God at a level that's quite profound. Even Jesus took the time to step away and be away from the multitudes, because after his popularity and after the crowd started following him, he really did not have a moment to himself. In Matthew 14, verse 23, it says, "After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone." In Matthew 14, he'd heard that his very good friend John the Baptist had been beheaded and was dead. So Jesus retreats from the crowds that are following him, and when I say crowds are following him, he's being stalked by like 20,000 people. He has no time alone. He gets into a boat to mourn privately. He literally cannot be sorrowful and have sadness from his friend except to get away from these people who are following him. He needs to mourn his friend, the loss of someone that he loves, but he also needs to mourn the fact that he's realizing that his duties in this life have just begun. He's realizing the enormity of his responsibility and what's coming to him, and he's seeing his future, and he's seeing that it's not going to be easy, and he's not going to have time alone. He's going to be surrounded by people who want him and who are going to have demands and who are going to be asking him for things, and he's not going to have time for himself. After his time alone, he comes back, and he's more creative, and he's a greater healer than before. Matthew 14:14 says, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick." And then he goes on to accomplish one of the most famous feats in the Bible, which is that he feeds 5,000 with just a few loaves and fish. But then immediately after that, he retreats into solitude again. So what is he doing? What is Jesus engaged in? What is he trying to accomplish? Is he running away, or is he going towards something? John Paul Newell in the Book of Creation says it like this, and I quote, "It is at times of stillness within ourselves that we can be alert to the creative depths that are within us." And what I'm arguing is that Jesus knows this. He knows that solitude and being alone and being still is essential for him living into what he is to become in this world back then. So he retreats to become more creative, more energized, and more intentional with his energies. If we think that God took the time to rest after the creation of the world, I think Jesus deserves the same thing. God's need breaks every once in a while. Even humans do. It doesn't matter what kind of solitude we need, whether it's going to a mountain hideaway or being alone in one's bedroom, listening to music or reading a book. They're all forms of retreat. They're all forms of stillness, and they're all forms of re-energizing the soul and spirit. Even meditation in one's home is essential and important. Meditation is finding the soul within the breath. Alan Cohen says, "If you want to find God, hang out in the space between your thoughts." And Amit Ray says, "If you want to conquer the anxiety of life, live in the moment, live in the breath." On stillpoint.com, they talk about the space between breaths. They say this is where the alchemy of transformation takes place. It is also the space and the experience that they call still point. Breath is important. In Hebrew, ruach means both spirit and breath. It also means wind. So when one lives into the space between breaths, one accesses God, spirit, and self. And we realize that a wind comes through and scours everything clean, all of our thoughts, all of our worries, all of our anxieties. Our souls, our creative selves are washed clean so that we may go forward with a more dynamic self, a more authentic self, a self that is closer to not only God, but closer to our own soul. It is a way of finding self. So imagine Jesus. He's mourning the loss of his friend John the Baptist. He's retreating to have his sadness, and then he returns to feed the 5,000. What was he doing on that mountain? I would suggest he was finding the space between his breaths. He was not only mourning his friend and having his solitude, but he was also finding his soul. He was finding his connection to God, his Father, and that place of still point between breaths so that he could return with greater spirit and creativity. Jesus returned with greater compassion and love than before, and he was nourished by rest, by breath, and by solitude. He found his soul again on that mountain, and he was able to return and feed the people and be more creative and bring greater life to the world. And I would encourage all of us to do the same. Instead of running from one project to the other, find solitude, find rest, nourish the self, and find your soul in between your breaths. That's it.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw.